police cruiser pulled into my driveway at 7 a.m. sharp. Karen Martinez stood behind them with a smug smile and a stack of legal papers, thinking she'd finally won. What she didn't know was that I wasn't just another homeowner she could bully. I was the one person who could make her entire HOA disappear with a single signature. And by the end of this story, that's exactly what I did. My name is David Chen, and I thought I was living the American dream. After 20 years of saving every penny, I'd finally bought my grandfather's old property in Willowbrook Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Denver. The house needed work, but it sat on the beautiful acres with mature oak trees and a creek running through the back. More importantly, it was where I'd spent my childhood summers. And now it was my dot. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks after I moved in. I was replacing rotted deck boards when a black Mercedes SUV pulled up to my fence. Out stepped Karen Martinez, a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm the HOA president. We need to discuss some violations." I wiped the sawdust from my hands and walked over. "Violations? I just moved in." She handed me a clipboard, thick with papers. "Your fence is 6 inches tall according to our architectural guidelines. Your mailbox doesn't match the approved design, and that vegetable garden needs to go. We don't allow food cultivation in front yards." I stared at her, incredulous. "That garden has been there for 40 years. My grandfather planted it. I'm sure he was a lovely man, but times change. You have 30 days to comply, or we'll begin fining you $500 per day per violation." That was my introduction to the Willowbrook HOA and to Karen Martinez. Over the next 6 months, my life became a bureaucratic nightmare. Every improvement I made triggered another violation. When I installed solar panels, she cited them as unsightly modifications. When I repaired my front walkway, she claimed I'd used the wrong shade of concrete. The fines piled up faster than I could contest them. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in November. I was winterizing my sprinkler system when Karen's Mercedes appeared again. But this time she wasn't alone. Behind her were the police cruisers and a city inspector, Mr. Chen. Officer Rodriguez said as he approached, "We've received complaints about unpermitted construction and possible code violations." I looked at Karen, who stood behind the officers with her arms crossed and that same satisfied smirk. "What unpermitted construction?" The city inspector, a thin man named Williams, consulted his tablet. "According to the complaint, you've been conducting major renovations without proper permits. We need to inspect your electrical and plumbing work." My heart sank. I had done most of the work myself, following online tutorials and YouTube videos. Some of it probably wasn't up to code, but I couldn't afford professional contractors. The complainant also alleges that your property extends beyond your legal boundaries, Williams continued. They claim you've been maintaining landscaping on HOA common areas. I felt the blood drain from my face. If they found code violations, I could face thousands in fines and be forced to tear out work I'd spent months completing. If they determined I was trespassing on HOA land, I could lose part of my property. "This is harassment," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. Karen stepped forward, her smile widening. "Mr. Chen, you've had multiple opportunities to comply with community standards. This is what happens when people think rules don't apply to them." The inspection took 4 hours. They found exactly what Karen hoped they would: electrical work that needed permits, a bathroom renovation that didn't meet current codes, and questionable boundary markers along my back fence. Williams handed me a thick stack of citations. "You have 60 days to bring everything up to code or face prosecution," he said. "The city will also need to conduct a formal survey to determine your exact property boundaries." After they left, I sat on my front step staring at the citations. The estimated cost to fix everything professionally was more than $40,000. Money I simply didn't have. Worse, if the survey went against me, I could lose a chunk of my backyard, including the creek my grandfather had loved so much. That night, I called my sister Jennifer in California. Through tears, I told her everything. "Dave, you need a lawyer." She said, "This sounds like targeted harassment. I can't afford a lawyer on top of everything else. Maybe I should just sell and move somewhere else." "Don't you dare. Grandpa left you that land for a reason. Remember what he always said about the property deed?" I did remember. Grandpa used to joke that he owned more land than the neighbors knew about. He kept all the old paperwork in a metal filing cabinet in his basement. Documents dating back to when he'd first bought the property in 1982 after we hung up. I went down to the basement for the first time since moving in. The filing cabinet was still there, locked and dusty. I found the key in his old desk and opened it. Inside were stacks of yellowed papers, the original deed, survey maps, tax records, and correspondence with the county. As I read through them, my hands began to shake. According to these documents, my grandfather hadn't just bought a house and 2 acres in 1982. He'd bought 17 acres of undeveloped land, planning to subdivide and sell lots eventually. But he'd never gone through with the subdivision. Instead, when developers approached him in the 1990s wanting to build Willowbrook Estates, he'd sold them 12 acres while keeping 5 for himself. The sale contract was right there in black and white. More importantly, the boundaries described. In my current deed matched the original 17-acre parcel, not the 5 acres I thought I owned. According to these papers, I didn't just own my house and yard. I owned the land under half of Willowbrook Estates, including the community center, the playground, and Karen Martinez's house. The developers had apparently assumed my grandfather would update his deed after the sale, but he never had for 30 years. They've been building and selling homes on land that legally still belonged to my family. My phone was buzzing with a text from Karen. "Mr. Chen, the whole board has voted to begin legal proceedings if you don't start addressing the violations immediately. You have been warned." I screenshot her message and smiled for the first time in months. Karen Martinez had no idea what she'd just started, but she was about to find out that sometimes the quiet guy who keeps to himself has the biggest ace up his sleeve. Monday morning, I was going to need a lawyer after all, but not for the reason Karen thought. The law office of Patricia Holloway looked nothing like the intimidating wood-paneled chambers I'd imagined. Instead, it felt like a modern coffee shop, complete with exposed brick walls and plants hanging from the ceiling. Patricia herself was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Chen," she said after reviewing my documents, "this is extraordinary. Do you understand what you've brought me?" I shifted in my chair. "I think so. It looks like I own more land than I thought." She laughed, but not unkindly. "David, if these documents are authentic, you don't just own more land. You own the foundation of what could be the largest property dispute in Colorado in decades." We spent the next 3 hours going through everything. Patricia explained that while my situation was legally fascinating, it would also be incredibly complex to resolve. The homeowners who'd bought houses in Willowbrook had done so in good faith. They couldn't be held responsible for the developer's failure to properly acquire the land. "But here's what we can do," she said, leaning forward with a gleam in her eye. "We can certainly stop this harassment campaign, and we might be able to negotiate something that benefits everyone." "Everyone except Karen Martinez," I said. Patricia smiled. "Well, that depends on how reasonable she wants to be." Our first step was to file a motion to dismiss all the HOA violations and fines. Citing my ownership of the land in question, Patricia also arranged for an independent survey to confirm the boundaries described in the original deed. The survey took 2 weeks. When the results came back, they confirmed everything. Not only did I own the land under dozens of homes in Willowbrook Estates, but the HOA's community center, pool, and maintenance facilities were all on my property. "David," Patricia called me the day we got the survey results. "We need to talk. Can you come in this afternoon?" Her tone worried me. When I arrived, she had another person with her, a tall man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Marcus Webb, a real estate attorney. David, Patricia said. Marcus represents the original development company, Pinnacle Properties. They want to discuss a settlement. Webb opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Mr. Chen, my clients are prepared to offer you fair market compensation for any legitimate claims you might have regarding the Willowbrook development. I looked at Patricia, who nodded for me to listen. We're talking about the $0.8 million. Webb continued, in exchange for quitclaim deeds that would resolve this matter permanently. My head spun. To $0.8 million would solve every problem I had and set me up for life. But something in Webb's expression bothered me. Why so much? I asked. Patricia answered before Webb could, because David, the alternative for them is potentially having to relocate 6 to 7 families and tear down millions of dollars in development. Webb's jaw tightened. Mr. Chen, this is an extremely generous offer. I'd encourage you to consider it carefully. After Webb left, Patricia and I talked alone. What do you think? I asked. I think they're scared, she said, and I think there's something they're not telling us. That settlement offer came way too fast, and it's way too clean. She was right. Over the next few days, Patricia started digging deeper into Pinnacle Properties and the original development deal. What she found made my blood boil. The development company had known about the deed issue all along. Internal emails from the 1990s, obtained through discovery motions, showed that they'd been aware my grandfather never properly conveyed the land. Their lawyers had advised them to resolve it quietly, but the company had decided to proceed anyway, betting that my grandfather wouldn't notice or wouldn't have the resources to fight them. They gambled, Patricia explained during our meeting. They figured an elderly man living alone wouldn't have the legal sophistication to understand what was happening. When your grandfather died and you inherited, they probably thought they were safe. But there was more. Patricia had also uncovered correspondence between Pinnacle Properties and the Willowbrook HOA board, including Karen Martinez. The development company had been secretly funding the HOA's legal actions against me, hoping to pressure me into selling my house and leaving the neighborhood. Karen wasn't just being a difficult neighbor, Patricia said, sliding a stack of emails across her desk. She was being paid to harass you. The emails were damning. Messages from Pinnacle's lawyers to Karen, outlining strategies to encourage Mr. Chen's departure from the community. They had identified me as a potential problem the moment I moved in, and had been orchestrating the violation campaign from the beginning. One email from Karen to the development company's lawyer made my hands shake as I read it. Chen is definitely the type who won't fight back. He keeps to himself and seems intimidated by authority. A few more violation notices, and I think he'll give up and move somewhere he can afford. They underestimated you, Patricia said quietly. I felt anger building in my chest, but also something else, determination. These people had tried to steal my grandfather's legacy and drive me from the home where I'd made my happiest childhood memories. They turned my neighbors against me and made me feel like a criminal for improving my own property. What can we do? I asked. Patricia's smile was sharp. David, I think it's time we sent Karen Martinez and Pinnacle Properties a message they won't forget. 2 days later, Patricia filed a federal lawsuit against Pinnacle Properties for fraud, conspiracy, and violations of fair housing laws. We also filed a civil suit against the Willowbrook HOA for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. But the real bombshell came in our third filing, a formal demand that Pinnacle Properties immediately cease all development activities on my land and begin proceedings to relocate the affected structures. The local news picked up the story that same afternoon. Local man discovers he owns half of exclusive subdivision. Read the headline on Channel 7's website. By evening, reporters were camping outside my house and Karen's. Karen's response was swift and predictable. She called an emergency HOA meeting and sent out a scathing letter to all residents, calling me a frivolous litigant who was trying to destroy our community for personal gain. The meeting was held at the community center, which, ironically, sat on my land. I decided to attend. The room was packed with angry homeowners. Karen stood at the front, flanked by 3 other board members. addressing the crowd like a general rallying troops. "This man," she said, pointing at me as I walked in, "is trying to steal your homes through legal technicalities and frivolous lawsuits. He's already cost our community thousands in legal fees, and he won't stop until he's destroyed everything we've built here." The crowd murmured angrily. I recognized most of these people as my neighbors, but the way they looked at me, now, I might as well have been a stranger. "Mr. Chen," Karen called out, "would you like to explain to these families why you think you have the right to tear down their homes?" Every eye in the room turned to me. My heart pounded, but I stood up. "Actually, Karen, I'd like to explain why you've been lying to them." The room fell silent. The federal courthouse in Denver felt as imposing as I had always imagined, with its marble columns and vaulted ceilings that seemed designed to make ordinary people feel small. But as I walked through the metal detectors that morning in March, I didn't feel small anymore. I felt ready. Patricia had spent the last 3 months building our case, and what she'd uncovered went far beyond anything we'd originally suspected. The conspiracy between Pinnacle Properties and the HOA wasn't just about pressuring me to leave. It was part of a systematic pattern of intimidation they'd used against other residents who questioned their authority or threatened their profits. "Remember," Patricia said as we took our seats at the plaintiff's table, "today is about more than just your property. We're exposing 30 years of fraud." The defense had brought an army of lawyers. Marcus Webb led the team representing Pinnacle Properties, while the HOA had hired Bradford and Associates, one of Denver's most expensive law firms. Karen Martinez sat in the front row behind the defense table, wearing a black suit and the same cold smile I'd come to know so well. Judge Sandra Martinez, no relation to Karen, thankfully called the court to order. She was a stern woman in her 60s who built her reputation on cutting through legal nonsense and getting to the truth. "Counselors," she said, "this is a complex case with significant implications for property law and community governance. I expect clear arguments based on facts, not emotions. Mr. Webb, you may begin." Webb stood confidently, buttoning his suit jacket. "Your Honor, the plaintiff is attempting to use an outdated document to undo 30 years of legitimate development and community building. The original deed he cites was superseded by subsequent agreements, and the doctrine of adverse possession. My clients acted in good faith throughout this process." He spent an hour laying out the defense's argument that even if my grandfather had technically retained ownership of the land, the passage of time and the improvements made by the developers had legally transferred ownership to them. Then Patricia stood up. "Your Honor, the defense would have you believe that 30 years of fraud somehow becomes legitimate simply because it went undetected. They would have you believe that a conspiracy to deceive an elderly property owner and later harass his heir is somehow excusable because it was profitable." She walked over to a large screen that had been set up in the courtroom and clicked a remote. The first image appeared, the original deed to my grandfather's property, clearly showing the 17-acre boundaries. "This is not a case about adverse possession or good faith mistakes," Patricia continued. "This is a case about deliberate deception and systematic intimidation." The next slide showed the internal emails between Pinnacle Properties and their lawyers discussing their knowledge of the deed problem and their decision to proceed anyway. Webb jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor. These documents were obtained through questionable discovery methods and may be protected by attorney-client privilege." Judge Martinez studied the documents, overruled. "If these communications involve criminal conspiracy, privilege doesn't apply. Continue." "Ms. Holloway." Patricia smiled and clicked to the next slide. Karen Martinez's email about me being the type who won't fight back. A murmur went through the courtroom. I glanced back and saw several Willowbrook residents in the gallery, including Mrs. Patterson from across the street and the Johnsons from the corner house. Their expressions had changed from hostility to surprise. The defendants didn't just steal Mr. Chen's land, Patricia continued. They orchestrated a campaign of harassment designed to drive him away before he could discover what they'd done. The next few slides showed a timeline of my HOA violations compared to the timeline of communications between Pinnacle and Karen Martinez. The correlation was unmistakable. But the real bombshell came when Patricia called her first witness, Robert Hendricks, a former Pinnacle Properties manager who left the company in 2010. Hendricks was a nervous man in his 50s who kept glancing at the defense table as he took the oath. Mr. Hendricks, Patricia began, during your employment with Pinnacle Properties, were you aware of any issues regarding the land ownership in Willowbrook Estates? Yes. He said quietly, we knew from the beginning that Chen's grandfather never properly conveyed the full parcel. What did company leadership decide to do about this? Webb objected, but Judge Martinez allowed the question. They decided to take the risk. Hendricks continued. The profit margins were too good, and they figured the old man would never notice or wouldn't be able to do anything about it. Were you aware of any efforts to conceal this from Mr. Chen's grandfather? Yes, we made sure all correspondence about the development went through intermediaries. We never wanted him to see anything that might make him question the boundaries. Patricia showed Hendricks several documents, including a memo he'd written in 2008 expressing concerns about the legal exposure. What was the response to your concerns? She asked. My supervisor told me it was too late to worry about it. He said we just had to hope Chen's grandfather died before he figured it out. The courtroom was completely silent. Even Webb looked shaken, but Patricia wasn't done. Her next witness was Jennifer Morris, the HOA secretary who'd been recording board meetings for the past 5 years. Ms. Morris, Patricia said, did Karen Martinez ever discuss targeting specific residents for violation enforcement? Yes, Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. She kept a list of residents she called problem owners. David Chen was at the top of that list. Did she ever explain why Mr. Chen was considered a problem? She said he was the type who might ask too many questions about property boundaries and development history. She wanted him gone before he caused trouble. Patricia played an audio recording that Jennifer had made during a closed HOA board meeting. Karen's voice filled the courtroom. We need to make Chen's life miserable until he gives up and moves. The development company is paying us well for this, but only if we get results. I want violation notices every week until he breaks. The gallery erupted in shocked whispers. Judge Martinez banged her gavel for order. Webb tried to recover during cross-examination, suggesting the recordings were taken out of context, and that Karen was simply trying to maintain community standards. But the damage was done. Then, Patricia called her final witness, Karen Martinez herself. Karen walked to the witness stand with her head high, but I could see the worry in her eyes. Patricia started gently, establishing Karen's role as HOA president and her relationship with Pinnacle Properties. Ms. Martinez, how much money has the HOA received from Pinnacle Properties over the past 3 years? I don't recall the exact amount. Patricia handed her a document. Does this refresh your memory? According to these bank records, Pinnacle Properties paid the Willowbrook HOA $47.00 in consulting fees during the period when Mr. Chen was being cited for violations. That money was for legitimate community improvements. What improvements? Karen faltered. Various maintenance projects. Can you identify any specific maintenance projects funded by these payments? The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Ms. Martinez, Patricia continued. Did you tell the other board members about these payments from Pinnacle Properties? The board was aware of our arrangement, but Jennifer Morris shook her head from the gallery, and Patricia caught it. Ms. Morris appears to disagree. Were the other board members aware that you were being paid to target Mr. Chen specifically? Webb objected, but Judge Martinez wanted to hear the answer. The other board members trusted my judgment about enforcement priorities, so the answer is no. Karen's composure finally cracked. Look, David Chen was destroying our property values with his shabby maintenance and non-conforming improvements. Someone had to take action, even if that action was based on fraudulent claims about property ownership. I didn't know about any property issues. I was just trying to protect the community. Patricia pulled out the email trail between Karen and Pinnacle's lawyers, Ms. Martinez. This email from you to Pinnacle's legal team says, Chen research complete. No legal sophistication, vulnerable to pressure tactics. Recommend accelerated enforcement. When did you research Mr. Chen's legal background? Karen's face went pale. I don't remember writing that. The metadata shows it was sent from your personal email account. Are you saying someone else had access to your email? Webb was on his feet objecting, but the question hung in the air. After a brief recess, Webb called his own witnesses, homeowners from Willowbrook, who talked about the community they built and their fears about losing their homes. It was emotionally powerful testimony, and I genuinely felt sorry for them. They were innocent victims in this situation, but Patricia had one final surprise, Your Honor. She said as court reconvened, I'd like to call a rebuttal witness, David Chen. This wasn't part of our original plan, but as I walked to the witness stand, I understood why Patricia was doing it. Mr. Chen, she said, what do you want to happen to the families living in Willowbrook Estates? I don't want anyone to lose their homes, I said. These people are victims just like me. They bought houses in good faith, and they built a community there. Then what are you seeking in this lawsuit? I looked over at Karen Martinez, who was staring at me with undisguised hatred. I want justice. I want the people who conspired to steal my family's land to be held accountable. And I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else. If you were to prevail in this lawsuit, would you force the residents of Willowbrook to relocate? No, I said firmly, but I would dissolve the HOA that allowed this to happen. The courtroom buzzed with surprised conversations. Judge Martinez banged her gavel. Mr. Chen, are you saying you would allow the residents to remain on the property? Yes, Your Honor, with proper compensation for the land use, and with a new community management structure that actually serves the residents, instead of outside corporate interests. I saw several of the Willowbrook residents in the gallery exchange glances. Mrs. Patterson was nodding, but I continued. Karen Martinez and the current HOA board would be permanently removed from any authority over the community. Karen shot to her feet. You can't do this. I've put 5 years of my life into that community, Ms. Martinez. Judge Martinez said sternly, please remain seated or I'll have you removed from my courtroom. Webb requested a brief recess to consult with his clients. When court resumed, he looked defeated. Your Honor, in light of Mr. Chen's testimony, Pinnacle Properties would like to explore settlement negotiations. But Judge Martinez shook her head. Mr. Webb, I've heard enough testimony to suggest that serious crimes may have been committed here. Before we discuss settlements, I'm ordering a full investigation into the fraud and conspiracy allegations. She looked directly at Karen Martinez. Ms. Martinez, I'm also recommending that the district attorney review this case for potential criminal charges. Karen's face went white, and she grabbed Webb's arm. Whispering urgently in his ear, Judge Martinez continued, this court will recess for 2 weeks while the parties consider their positions. But let me be clear, if the evidence supports Mr. Chen's claims, there will be significant consequences for everyone involved in this conspiracy. As we filed out of the courtroom, Patricia squeezed my arm. David, I think we're about to get everything we wanted, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. The phone call came at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 1 week before we were supposed to return to court. I recognized Patricia's number, but not her tone. David, you need to get down to my office right now, she said, and don't talk to anyone on the way. I threw on clothes and drove to her office, my mind racing with possibilities. When I arrived, Patricia was waiting with Detective Ray Martinez from the Denver Police Department's white-collar crime unit. The irony of his last name wasn't lost on me. Mr. Chen, Detective Martinez said, we need to discuss some developments. In your case, Patricia looked grim. David, the district attorney has been investigating the fraud allegations, and they've uncovered something we didn't expect. She slid a folder across the desk. Inside were bank records, email transcripts, and what appeared to be surveillance photos. Karen Martinez wasn't the mastermind behind this conspiracy, Patricia said. She was just another victim. I stared at the documents, confused. What are you talking about? We have recordings of her admitting to targeting me. Detective Martinez leaned forward. Mr. Chen, we've been investigating Pinnacle Properties for 3 years as part of a broader real estate fraud task force. Your case gave us the breakthrough we needed. The detective explained that Pinnacle Properties was actually a subsidiary of a larger company called Meridian Development Group for the past decade. Meridian had been running elaborate schemes across Colorado, deliberately building on properties with unclear titles, then using various pressure tactics to force the true owners to sell or abandon their claims. They've done this 43 times, Detective Martinez said. Your case isn't unique. It's their standard operating procedure. But the real shock came when Patricia showed me the surveillance photos. They showed Karen Martinez meeting with a man I didn't recognize at various locations around Denver. That's Thomas Kellerman, Patricia said. He works for a company called Community Compliance Solutions, which is owned by Meridian. For the past 2 years, he's been blackmailing Karen Martinez. The story that emerged was both simpler and more complicated than what we'd thought. 2 years ago, Karen's teenage son had been arrested for selling drugs at his high school. The charges were serious enough to potentially ruin his chances of getting into college and destroy Karen's reputation in the community she'd worked so hard to build. Thomas Kellerman had approached Karen shortly after her son's arrest, offering to make the charges disappear in exchange for her cooperation in targeting me. He'd had connections in the prosecutor's office and had delivered on his promise. Karen's son was allowed to plead to a minor misdemeanor with no jail time. But the blackmail didn't stop there. Detective Martinez continued. Kellerman kept demanding more cooperation, threatening to reveal how her son's case had been handled if she didn't comply. Patricia showed me transcripts of recorded phone calls between Karen and Kellerman. In them, Karen sounded desperate and frightened, not like the smug HOA president I'd come to know. I can't keep doing this, Karen's voice said through Patricia's computer speakers. David Chen hasn't done anything wrong. This isn't fair to him. Kellerman's response chilled me. Karen, your son is starting college in the fall. It would be a shame if Colorado State found out about his real criminal history. Just keep following the plan. I sat back in my chair, trying to process this information. So Karen was being forced to harass me. Yes and no, Patricia said. She chose to go along with it to protect her son, but she did genuinely come to resent you. People often blame their victims when they feel guilty about what they're doing. Detective Martinez pulled out another folder. Mr. Chen, Meridian Development Group has been doing this for years, but they've always been careful to cover their tracks. Your case is the first time we've been able to prove the conspiracy from the ground up. What does this mean for my lawsuit? Patricia smiled for the first time that morning. It means you're about to become very wealthy, and Meridian is about to face federal charges for racketeering. The next week in court was unlike anything I could have imagined. Judge Martinez called the session to order, but before either side could present arguments, federal agents walked into the courtroom and arrested Thomas Kellerman, who'd been sitting in the back row thinking he was just observing. Webb stood up, looking confused. Your Honor, I'm not sure what's happening here, but my clients object to this disruption. Mr. Webb, Judge Martinez said, your clients have bigger problems than this lawsuit. I've just been informed that federal charges have been filed against Meridian Development Group and several subsidiaries, including Pinnacle Properties. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Karen Martinez sat in the front row crying, while residents from Willowbrook looked around in confusion. When order was restored, Patricia stood to address the court. Your Honor, in light of the federal criminal charges, my client would like to propose a settlement that we believe serves the interests of justice and protects the innocent residents of Willowbrook Estates. What followed was the most surreal hour of my life. Patricia outlined a plan that she'd negotiated with the federal prosecutors. the remaining legitimate executives at Pinnacle Properties, and even Karen Martinez's attorney. Under the settlement, I would receive clear title to all 17 acres of the original property, plus $3.2 million in damages from Meridian seized assets. But more importantly, the residents of Willowbrook would be allowed to remain in their homes under long-term lease agreements that would give them the option to purchase their lots at below-market rates over the next 10 years. The existing HOA would be dissolved and replaced with a resident-controlled community association. Karen Martinez would resign from any leadership position and pay a substantial fine, but she would avoid criminal charges in exchange for her cooperation with the federal investigation. Your Honor, I said when Judge Martinez asked for my final statement 6 months ago. I just wanted to live quietly on my grandfather's land and honor his memory. I never wanted to hurt innocent people or destroy a community. I look back at the gallery, where many of my neighbors were sitting, but I also won't let anyone steal my family's legacy or intimidate me into giving up what's rightfully mine. This settlement protects everyone's interests while making sure this never happens again. Judge Martinez approved the settlement, and just like that, it was over. But the real twist came 2 days later. When Karen Martinez knocked on my door, I almost didn't answer. Despite everything I learned about her situation, I wasn't sure I was ready to face her. But when I opened the door, the woman standing on my porch looked nothing like the confident HOA president who'd made my life miserable for so many months. "David," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I know you probably don't want to see me, but I needed to apologize." I stepped aside and let her in. "I know about the blackmail," I said. "I understand why you did what you did." She sat on my couch and started crying. "No, you don't understand. Yes, they were threatening my son, but I could have found another way. I could have gone to the police or hired a lawyer. Instead, I took the easy path and made you suffer for it." She looked around my living room, taking in the photos of my grandfather and the renovation work I'd done. "You were just trying to make a home here," she continued, "just like all of us. And I turned you into an enemy because it was easier than standing up to the real criminals." We talked for an hour. Karen told me about her fears for her son, about the pressure she'd felt to maintain her image as the perfect community leader, about how she gradually convinced herself that I really was a problem that needed to be solved. "The worst part," she said, "is that I actually started to believe my own lies. I convinced myself that you were trying to destroy our community, when really you were just trying to live in peace." As she was leaving, she turned back to me. "David, I know I don't deserve it, but I hope someday you can forgive me, and I want you to know that if you'll have me, I'd like to be part of whatever community we build here going forward." I thought about my grandfather, about the stories he used to tell about neighbors helping neighbors during hard times. "Karen," I said, "everyone deserves a second chance. But the community we build here is going to be based on honesty and mutual respect, not fear and intimidation." She nodded. "I understand, and I'll spend however long it takes earning that trust." Back 6 months later, I was standing in the same spot where this story began, replacing deck boards on my grandfather's house. But now, instead of working alone, I had help. Mrs. Patterson was painting the new railings while her husband fixed a loose step. The Johnson kids were playing in the yard with tools, helping by handing me screws. Even Karen was there, weeding the vegetable garden that had started this whole mess. We weren't friends exactly, but we were neighbors in the truest sense of the word. The new Willowbrook Community Association had its first official meeting the week before, and instead of violation notices and fines, we spent 2 hours discussing the neighborhood block party and a community garden project. Karen had volunteered to coordinate the garden, saying she wanted to learn about growing vegetables properly. "You know," Mrs. Patterson said as she climbed down from her ladder, "this is what Willowbrook was supposed to be all along, a real community, not a collection of houses ruled by fear." I looked around at my neighbors working together on my grandfather's old property, and I could almost hear his voice in the wind through the oak trees. Sometimes, David, you have to fight for what's right. But the real victory isn't in winning the fight. It's in building something better from what's left behind. Thomas Kellerman was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Meridian Development Group was dissolved and its assets were distributed to the victims of their various schemes across Colorado. The federal investigation ultimately led to charges against 17 people in what prosecutors called one of the largest real estate fraud conspiracies in state history. But for me, the real victory was simpler. I kept my grandfather's land, honored his memory, and turned a community built on deception into one founded on trust and mutual respect. As the sun set behind the mountains that evening, I stood on the deck my grandfather had built 40 years ago and smiled. Karen Martinez had called the cops, thinking she could intimidate me into disappearing. Instead, she'd helped me discover a truth that set an entire community free. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building something so much better that the people who tried to tear you down end up wanting to be part of what you've created. And if you're dealing with a situation like mine, whether it's an HOA, a landlord, or anyone else trying to bully you out of what's rightfully yours, remember this: keep your documents, know your rights, and never underestimate the power of standing up for yourself. You might be surprised by what you discover when you start digging into the truth. The fight might be harder than you expect, but the victory will be sweeter than you can imagine.